Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Black Expat Experience, a live show and podcast highlighting the lived experiences of Black expats around the world. I am Kendall Tyson, your host, licensed psychotherapist, and fellow Black expat living in Beijing. And we have another great episode in store for you today. I would like to welcome our newest guest, Dr. Natasha Gordon Chipembere. Thank you so much and welcome to the show, Natasha.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm excited to jump into a conversation with you.
Yes. So, what I'd like to start off with is our guest really giving us a trajectory of their life and introduction to who they are. So, who would you say Natasha is?
Ooh, big question. Okay, so I guess formally, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, so Brooklyn in the house. My mother's Costa Rican, my father's Panamanian, and so I'm first generation born in the United States. I am formally trained as an academic in African Diasporic literature, looking at African descendant legacies around the world. But specifically, my most recent work, I'd say within the last 10 years or so, has been really thinking about Afro-descendant legacies in Latin America. About 9.5 years ago, my husband and I decided with our two children that since we've always had a relationship with Costa Rica because of my mother's family, New York was going to be a difficult place, and not only New York, but sort of the United States was going to be a difficult place post Obama. So that was right as like 2013, we were really thinking about what was coming next, and we're pretty good at taking the thermometer in terms of history, right? And reading history in the United States. So we understood what was coming and we were not disappointed. We only did not anticipate COVID, right? We didn't anticipate that, but we certainly anticipated a Trump-like figure coming. We did that. And so we had the opportunity to move to Costa Rica. It's not for everybody, but because I am the fourth generation Costa Rican, I was able to really, because I have such an extended family, I was able to come to Costa Rica, put my children in school. They're in an international school, and land here. And I'm a professor at a U.S. institution that has a campus here. So that's what I do. I still teach here, and I write, and I'm also a yoga teacher and a Reiki practitioner.
Oh my goodness. I am feeling so many like kindred ties right now with all the identities and things and the hats that you're wearing while you are just forging a new life in Costa Rica. And I'm getting all tingly, honestly, with the things that you shared. I want to hit on something that you said. It's kind of like reading the tea leaves post Obama. Can you give me like a little bit more of what you mean? Because it's making me think about, I think it's Carol Anderson. I think that's her, this book that she wrote. Tell us more about what you mean about understanding what the world would look like post-Obama and understanding what that looks like as far as it might be time to shift.
So there's a specific moment that I go back to when people ask me about what was the thing that really pushed you over the edge. And before I go to that story, let me just say that my husband and I met 26 years ago in South Africa. And so he's a musician and he's Malawian American. And I was in South Africa doing my doctorate. Right. And so we met there and we've traveled extensively. And so travel, it was already something that we were very much engaged in. And in raising our children in New York, we always came back to Costa Rica as well. So it was a familiar. But I remember specifically my son, who is the eldest, he's 21 now, my daughter's 17, and he played baseball for as long as I can remember in Brooklyn. And I remember during a spring break, it was probably in 2012, during spring break, he was, I don't know, maybe 8 or so, and we were on the mall, right? This is the first time that I'd taken the kids. We were there, and he was on the mall, and he ran ahead of us. So my daughter who is 4 years younger than him would, fall like I'm jogging in the field, kind of, mom, look at me. And this older Black man grabbed him and basically stopped him and was like, you can't run. Basically saying they're gonna think if you're running in this Black body, then they're gonna think that you just stole something from somebody. And so it was at that moment, sort of the decompress, right? The bringing home and having to have a conversation to our child about why this older Black man infused his fear, because he was thinking he was an elder protecting you, but he basically infused and transferred his fear onto you about this criminalized Black body that you were inhabiting, right? And so it was at that moment, I think, that we began to really think about, okay, well, clearly, if we look at, the end of the Civil War, if we think of the Reconstruction, if we think about Black success, and then the Black codes and Jim Crow, when we think about like the way that Black success gets thwarted, right, gets stalled, gets stagnated, is trying, contained. Very much we thought about, sort of not necessarily what the Obamas actually did, because there were things on their watch that was questionable, right, particularly in Africa, but what they symbolized in terms of breaking a particular glass ceiling, right? So you could not tell children of color any longer, they could not vision being either a first lady or a president, right? And in the past, it was realistic to tell children of color, well, you can't become that because we've never seen it. It's never been possible. And so we understood that it was at that moment in the history of the country of what was coming. It was going to be an ultra conservative, bringing back white nostalgia, birth of the nation, and we got it.
Like on steroids.
And it's on its way back. Don't be fooled.
Oh, I'm not at all. Like they are entrenching themselves in state government, national government, media. And I wish that people were more aware of like the nuances and really did what they could to exercise the power that we have collectively before it becomes what we see is brewing right now. As a therapist, it's like the importance of prevention as a means of treatment, right? As a means of healing, as opposed to reacting to something that happens. What are we doing to prevent it being as bad as it could be, especially when you see just the landscape of things changing, and especially people like yourself who are a lot more educated on what that backlash can look like in a historical context. And we know the history repeats itself. If things don't change, it frightens me. Like, yeah, I'm here in China, and China is China.
Exactly.
I'll leave it at that because they lurk. But going back home, I have so much, just my heart's palpitating even as I think about it now. As a single Black woman, with asthma, living in COVID, and just the unrest that's happening back home. There's just so much fear, and I don't like to live in a space of fear. So yes, it's a lot. I'll say that. A lot doesn't even encompass all the feelings that are attached to it that I think us and a lot of other, Black individuals of the diaspora have in common, as far as what was the impetus for us to make that exit from the States. And I'm really sorry that happened to your son, that someone else thinking that they were being protective, infused their anxiety and their fear and their trauma onto, your child. But I from reading what I've read, I know that out of this difficult decision has been born, or at least I gather from, this difficult decision, there's been so much birthed from this opportunity to, sojourn to Costa Rica. And I would love for you to share with us, what were some of the deciding factors for you and your family as you made that final decision to take the plunge and move abroad?
Right. Well, I guess there are two things. First, my husband and I made it really clear that we were going to prioritize the well-being of our children, right? And so in sitting down and telling them about moving to Costa Rica, we said that we would try it for a year.
Mhm.
right? And so that means we put things in storage units, we packed 8 suitcases, we mailed 28 boxes of books, and that was pretty much the extent of it, right? And we were. I mean, honestly, I know my husband and I mean, in real talk, we were like, we're not going back there. But if our children did not thrive, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about tolerating, but if they were not thriving in the environment, then we would obviously consider returning because our children are our first priority. And magically, they ended up having an incredibly
Of
beautiful childhood.
course.
We had a beautiful home. We got a puppy. The kids got bikes, and they're completely bilingual in Spanish. My son's actually graduating from university now. He goes to university in Canada,
Leonette.
and yeah, and my daughter is applying to universities in Canada as well right now. She's a senior in high school, and they have forged friendships that I believe will be lifelong. When my son comes home for Christmas, he's just home now. His entire posse of friends all gather, and there's so much to do, and it's really beautiful because these are genuine friendships that have sustained over time. These kids have grown with each other, and it was and my children tell me this, it was the best decision of our lives. And so that affirmation is incredibly important. So I would say that that's what we led with, right? We led with coming to visit Costa Rica a couple of times to find a school for the kids first that felt really good for them the year before, and then getting them into the school. And once they got into the school, we then figured out housing so that we could be close by, just to make sure that even when we needed to purchase a car, we would still be able to get them to school and get them into the routine. Um, and then the other thing, because I said there were two, so that's what drove us first. And then the other thing was that first year in Costa Rica, I was actually on a research fellowship. And so it was the first time in my adult life where I didn't actually have to go to a job. Like literally since, I don't know, 17, I mean, like, so
It's weird.
right. It was an amazing experience. And that's when I began to write my novel. So my husband, who's a musician, is a creative, and I'm a formally trained academic, right? So I'm a professor. I've been teaching for over 20 years in various classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. But I've always known I wanted to write creatively, right? I teach writing, I teach literature, but I've never actually done it myself. And so I love the genre of historical fiction. And so that's one of the things I wanted to do. And in moving to Costa Rica, my husband and I sort of had this agreement that we would be more intentional about our creative lives here, right? And so that was something that very much like, I know I want to be a writer, I know I want to write, and so I need to carve out time. And it was the first time in my life that I actually had an office space of my own with a door and a view. And like I had a desk, I had space, I had, it wasn't like a small apartment in Brooklyn, or going to an office at the university, but it was actually a space of my own. And that changed everything. So I would say that those are the two major things that really moved us towards being really intentional about coming to Costa Rica. And I always say this, we went by choice, not by force. We walked
Right.
out of the United States with dignity because we had the ability to do that, and we made a choice. It is very different when people were obviously forced to come to other spaces in the diaspora that was not their choice.
Yes. You just hit on so many things. Just the privilege and the freedom to choose, to make that life transition says a lot. Um,
Mhm.
and I also think it helps us to appreciate, as you're sharing, those who do not have that option.
Mhm.
And how do we, I would imagine through our platforms and our resources, what does it look like to assist, to give back, to shine a light, to give voice to individuals that do need that additional assistance, right? But you just keep hitting on so many things for me in this, and this is not about me clearly, but as an international educator, as a therapist, as a professional school counselor working at an international school in China, I am so grateful for parents like you and your husband to prioritize the wellness and the needs of your children as one of the major deciding factors to the country that you chose to move to. And to hear that your kids are thriving and that they are, expanding and that they are moving into the next phase of their lives because they have parents that understand the importance of taking care of their wellness holistically. I just want to say thank you. I can't express it enough. And I don't know if you hear that, especially from this perspective, but I see, there aren't many Black children of the diaspora in the schools that I work with and work in, and they often suffer being the only. And I can imagine that there are all types of ethnicities of children and cultures in the school that they attend, but I almost feel here there's a bit of a returning home, like going to Costa Rica, because you do have what'd you say, 4 generations
Exactly.
a family. And I'm a little jelly, right? Because it's like, I wonder what that will look like to understand where does the heritage come from? Where is the homeland? What does that look like? And just to reconnect and reestablish a presence in those spaces. So I'm really happy for you and for your family for doing that and really finding happiness and thriving in this season of your life. Oh, I'm trying not to go all metaphysical and therapy. It's so hard.
I don't want to, it's not perfect, right? And there's no country that's perfect. And I think that one of the things that I do have to say is that in making this decision to leave, we also left large financial security, right? So we kind of had to start over from zero and get paid in the local currency. And it's a radically different world from living and working in New York City. And it's so funny because my husband and I on paper made a chunk of money. My kids were in private school. I mean, we did all the things. But I always say that we were still struggling in some ways. We were living on credit cards, and we don't do any of that here. There's no debt. What we can afford, we can afford. And so, that's the trade-off. But I think what happens is we end up having a different relationship with time and our time and how we value it. Certainly that was the case for me. And the quality of life has changed, right? The quality of life has changed where we value and nurture some relationships and then some relationships go, because obviously in moving, right, you lose people, right? We definitely were part of a very big, I would say, an African diasporic community, artistic community with families in Brooklyn. And, some of the issues were, people were like, you're selling it out, you're leaving us. I was just like, in the first place, where on the planet is there not Black struggle? We just picking it up over here in this corner over here. and right? So we are not selling out anything. I mean, we're raising our children in consciousness, and we are committed to maintaining and supporting organizations and projects still in the States, as well as forging these communities here and serving as a bridge, right? Where people can come between spaces, and why not be a little bit more global rather than stay in your box in Brooklyn?
I thank you for saying that. Because I definitely don't ever want to paint the picture that it is all roses and sunshine. It is a different level, it's a different type of struggle, right? And when you make that decision to pack up, move your life, live, outside of your home country. But what you just offered, when we encounter individuals that don't understand our vision, that don't understand our purpose, that are working and operating out of their own perspective and understanding, if you were having to coach, guide, instruct, support an individual that is at the point of making that decision to transition somewhere else, what would you say to them in how to deal with naysayers, people that don't understand, people that operate out of fear?
So I do a lot of expat coaching, right?
Okay.
I have helped a lot of families move to Costa Rica. And so it's that particular question. Usually what I always say to folks who are thinking about moving, I say always try for 1 year. Give it the 1 year, like this could be my forever home, or maybe this didn't reach my expectations, but you don't necessarily have to give everything up. Try it for a year, even with the family. You can try it for a year and and if it doesn't work, then you go back. But in terms of naysayers, my thought is meet them where they are, bless them, but go on with your vision. I mean, really, the only person that can stop you is you. At the end of the day, that's it.
Yeah. Um, it's like the through line that I hear when I speak to interview people is I really second guess myself after listening to folks that were afraid and wanted to again cloak me in their fear, their lack
Mhm.
of understanding. And I share with people that you have to have a strong sense of who you are.
Right.
Um, and you have to have an understanding of this is something that I've noticed, especially doing the work that I do with expats here, is what is the motive? Are you running from something or are you moving towards something? And if you are moving toward abundance, growth, a bit of discomfort because the process is not necessarily always comfortable, but if you're moving toward like the next phase and the next iteration of yourself, then what other people say will not necessarily stop you from making that decision. Now, you might be stirred, and there's nothing wrong with that because that helps you to reaffirm your decision, really
Mhm.
get reconnected to your why and move on. But I hear that a lot in our communities. It even makes me think about like this is such a tangent. The move that Deion Sanders made from Jackson State going to where is he going? Colorado. Just
Right.
the level of vitriol that people had. Oh, you're leaving your people, you're doing all this, and what are we supposed to do, right? As a community,
Right.
how do we grow if
If you can't follow opportunity, then what happens? Because if one person gets an opportunity and they understand that their opportunity means that they can bring other people with them, hello,
yes,
more people to feed, more people to sustain, more people to be joyful. Why knock down opportunity?
yes, yes. That makes me think about because I read your articles in Essence,
Oh,
bravo.
good. Thank
Um,
you.
your writers retreat.
Yes.
Please tell us more about Tengo said. I forgot what that means in Spanish, and I like literally
I'm thirsty.
that's it. It was Thursday. I was like, I don't want to look it up. I know it. Tengo said writers retreats in Costa Rica really makes me make that link, that connection to building the bridge, something you said earlier, for opportunity. So can you share with us? Because to me, it feels like community, right? Community
Yes.
and creation. Can you please share with us more of the vision and the purpose for your retreats?
Yes, thank you. So tengo sed is my special baby. It means in Spanish, tengo sed, I am thirsty, but not obviously in the physical sense of it. It's like I'm thirsty for community, I'm thirsty for sustenance, I'm thirsty for opportunity, I'm thirsty for learning, right? But being in a space that's safe. And so in thinking about coming to Costa Rica and having this 1 year of being on this research grant, I initially I thought I was just going to write more of a historical book on slavery in Costa Rica, right? Because one of the things that as a scholar who studies slavery, one of the things that I've always had conversations with my Costa Rican family, and particularly my mother, is that in the education system here in Costa Rica, they do not share that they had slavery, and Costa Rica was a colonial country, and Costa Rica did have slavery for over 200 years, and there was very much an Afro-descended presence here of both free and enslaved Africans, right? They did not have a slave port, but so most of the enslaved people came through Panama, right, which was the main slave port in the region of Latin America, Central America. And so my work initially, right at the beginning, was really thinking about, well, thinking about slavery in Costa Rica, which is not narratized at all in their history. And then thinking about the fact that Costa Rica has a Black Madonna, which 92% of the population venerates, right? And I'm like, so how do you put together a Black Madonna and no slavery? Like, how does that work, right? And so, and where does Blackness kind of meet up in the middle? And so that's what I was originally doing my research on. And then I was thinking, but then I was like, okay, well, I have all these facts, but fiction has to be part of it because it then adds a layer where I can envision the world and sort of create these characters, but really contextualize it within 1634, right? So that's sort of like the time frame or the time stamp that I look at. And so I started writing probably 10, 15, 20 pages. And I thought, gosh, I've never written fiction before. I would love to have a community of people, writers, scholars, artists around me where we could just share and workshop. And I would love to have it in Costa Rica where people can get out of New York, get out of the United States, and just come to this very beautiful space. So it was actually a selfish and it was it was a very individualistic idea. But there are a couple of things I thought about. I thought about, well, one, a writing community of people from all over who wanted to come together. It was curated, so meaning that, people, there was an application process and there was a committee
Good.
that would read. Yes, all of that was organized. And then I thought about, well, I want us to be able to be in a space that's beautiful, that there's luxury, that there is space to breathe, right? And so that's one of the things I also thought, because we deserve it. We deserve beautiful things, right? And it doesn't have to be, $90 million. It can just be a beautiful landscape. It can be flowers every day. It can be, fresh food, air, right? And so that's how the first Tango Said started in January 2015. And I think I had 13 people. Um,
Good.
13 people come from all over, from the Caribbean, from the United States, come. Some of the people I knew, some of the people I didn't, and I managed it, meaning I hired someone to cook and clean, and we had a driver, and we were in a space that was unplugged. There was no internet. So literally, we did yoga, we ate food, we took walks, and we had this big private property we were on that slept 24 of us. And we just wrote and workshopped. And that was the space that I shared the first 20 pages of my novel that came out in September, Finding La Negrita. So it was almost like a 6-7 year process. And so it has evolved. I now work with a wellness resort in Atenas, which is in the Central Valley, because for the first 3 retreats, we were on the Caribbean coast, and now we're here closer to the Central Valley and closer to the airport. But it is an incredible, impeccable space. We didn't have it during COVID, and so there's been a wait list. I'm already booked fully for January 24. Yes, completely booked. And it's number 7. And that'd be retreat number 7. And it's just an incredible space. It's incredible. You can imagine, we've had times where it's been like 12 or 13 Black women sitting at a table. Most of them are at the top of their game academically or in their profession. And we're sitting at this table and we're laughing and we're eating and we're crying. And the fellowship is spectacular. The writing that gets done, the feedback that happens. I teach the yoga classes. The food is all farm to table, organic. So you can just imagine 5 days of this, and it's a spa, so you can get services. There's pools. It's over the top.
I mean, I'm feeling it all. Like I can visualize it so clearly. Oh my goodness. Congratulations
Thank
on,
you.
What always astonishes me is how the best things can be birthed out of a small idea, especially when we give ourselves permission to do the thing that we're kind of, afraid of doing because we don't know how big it can be or what it could be. So
Yes.
I'm really curious about what kind of things that you have to unblock in order to move into this opportunity for yourself.
That's a good question. I've always been an organizer. So like I'm the person that planned conferences, took students on trips, like I've done all that. And so it's not hard for me to organize and manage, even though planning these retreats take about a year, right? Because I have to work with the venue. I mean, even just dealing with 15 different dietary needs, right? So who doesn't eat raisins? Who doesn't eat, I mean, it is, who doesn't eat cilantro? All of those things have to be managed, right? And so I mean, in terms of unblocking things, I guess the biggest struggle for me in all of these spaces has been taking off the hat of the organizer and putting on the hat of the writer and being vulnerable
Yeah.
in the space of sharing my own work. And it has been wonderful when I've done it, but it's hard sometimes to make that decision where I'm not kind of managing. I'm really that person, you know? So to say I'm going to be now a participant has, again, I guess that's the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, when you think about leaning into that vulnerability of letting go, how do you think that you've evolved as an organizer, as an academic, as a mother, as a wife, as an author, when you lean into the vulnerability of letting go?
Oh, I mean, it's marvelous things have happened. I've published a book, which is the
Yeah.
thing I said I wanted to do since I was 5 years old. And it allowed me to shift into a new identity, actually to put it forward, right? So I've always said, you know, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm an academic, you know, professor, do research. But when people ask me now, I'm like, I'm a writer, right?
Mm,
Which sort of really takes me back to the identity that I was born with. When I was 5 years old, I said to my family, I want to be a writer. And I knew that as a child. And so it's taken me this time to come back to that truth. And that is where I think I'm most grateful for the vulnerability of being able to go back and recognize that that's my truth. And it's always been my truth. And it will continue to be my truth.
yes, I am, like, honestly astounded at, well, actually, I don't know if astounded is the right word, but it always intrigues me how, when we really begin to live authentically, when we kind of step into the unknown of what life can bring for us, that we can trace back to these seeds that have been planted in our life from an early point. It feels really affirming, even just to hear you saying, nope, I knew back then that this is what I wanted to be. And
Mhm.
really to just kind of, in the work that I do, we do a lot of timelines that help people to look at impactful and indelible moments that kind of got them to this point. And I'm wondering, in your growth as a person, has this desire really shown up in different iterations throughout your life?
That's a good question. I think my husband would say absolutely, because he always goes back to when we met in South Africa. I carried this little blue notebook and I would write certain times. And every now and again, I'd read to him. And, you know, I had like, you know, when you're in your early 20s, you know, that moment where you write poetry. And so I did poetry at a couple of poetry slams. And I was, you know, I mean, people felt that it was good poetry for me. I'm not a poet, you know, but it was sort of what people did in the 90s, you know, and so I took a stab at that, and I did a little short story writing. And for me, my husband can still say, I remember the detail of this character. Like he can say this 26 years later, and I'm like, okay, I don't even know where that notebook is, but I trust you. And so I think that it has. I've always kept journals. I mean, I would say that in my travels, I've kept journals. Recent year, no, I haven't. My planner is kind of my journal, meaning that it's like
Different.
that thick, right? Because life is busy. Um, but I think that I have always attempted at some sort of writing, yes. But I've never attempted at writing a novel until I did here in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it kind of sounds as if the art of writing, the art of release, the art of catharsis through word is a saving grace. That's kind of what I hear. And I would love for you to kind of share more insight on how the process of crafting, finding La Negrita has really kind of shaped your perspective um, at this point.
Thank you for that question. So I would say it's an ancestral process.
Mm,
Right. So I'm a person who very much has an ancestral team. I have like a power team of like great grandmother, grandmother, and auntie,
love
and
it.
they are like they
I
don't
love
play. And so I am always grateful for them and the way that they open up the road for me. And so one of the things that's really interesting in terms of finding La Negrita is in January 2013, I was given a small research grant by my university to come to Costa Rica to actually do research. Because, as I said, I originally thought I was going to write like a historical book on slavery in Costa Rica. So I was given a research grant to just come for, I mean, it was like enough to buy a plane ticket. And I just begged a cousin if I could just stay with her, right? Because I have such a big family here. But it was the first time coming to Costa Rica where I was as an adult. I didn't have my children or my husband with me, didn't have my sister or my parents. And it wasn't Christmas time, right? And it wasn't like a holiday or a birthday or a family reunion. It
right.
was just kind of, I showed up in the middle of the work week and people were like, oh, okay. And my cousin was like, well, here's a set of keys for you, and there's the bus stop. And I was like, what? What? No one's gonna drive me to the library? No one's gonna like, what is
You
happening?
on your
And
own.
I was like, with my struggle Spanish, I was like, oh boy, here I go with my colones of the bus. I was so nervous. I was like, whatever. And the experience was beautiful. And I was like, I remember going to the library and working with the librarians and getting all this rich information and going there for like 4 or 5 days and just really being focused as a scholar in this and just being very inspired. And just, I remember one day I was at a coffee shop and I was just sitting there and I was like, I'm sitting in Costa Rica at a coffee shop by myself and I love this. I could do this. Right. And I mean, I've traveled. I mean, I lived in South Africa for years. I lived in Kenya. I've been to many places where I've actually moved, not just like as a tourist.
Right.
And so, but the experience felt very grounding for me. And so on the last day, right before I left, I asked another cousin, I was like, can you take me to the Basilica in Cartago, which is a bit far, the former colonial capital? It's about an hour's drive from where we were staying. So I could go see the icon. I had never seen her. And I remember, so when you go to the Basilica, most people enter and then they go on their knees to the altar, right? In petition or in pilgrimage, right? And so I didn't go on my knees, but there were people going on their knees, but I went to the altar and I remember being at the altar. I remember there were two nuns to my right, and I closed my eyes and instantly I felt this presence of these African people, these Black people who were on the altar surrounding the icon. And I was like, oh, so it wasn't the icon, but it was just all these people. And when I opened my eyes, I had been weeping and I didn't realize it at all. And I remember coming back and sitting in one of the pews before I left, and I said, oh, it's the story of the Black people who venerated the La Negrita in the 17th century that I need to tell their story. And so I said right there in the Basilica, I said, I will tell your story if you open every door for me to do it. And let me tell you,
Oh my
the
God.
machetes came out, the
Right.
doors, the visas, the one-way plane ticket, the acceptance to the school for my children, a beautiful home happened,
There
and
it is. Ooh.
and I did it. And it took me 7 years
Oh,
and
wow.
lots of rejections from presses. I mean, people treated me horribly. Nobody wanted to take a risk on this book. And then finally, this Black woman, Lisa Pegram, I'll call her name, was an acquisitions editor. And she was like, let me read it. And let me tell you, this woman published this book with, I mean, and so much support. But my book is unchanged, pretty much from where it started to the end. No one asked me to whiten a character. No one asked me to change a sentence. No one asked me how I wrote it is essentially, with obviously some grammar stuff, was
Right.
essentially what the book looks like today. And I'm so grateful.
Wow. 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 Oh, I'm I'm I I- I'm hardly ever at a loss for words, but I'm really having an experience right now through what you just shared. Um, as you were describing just being gloriously overwhelmed with all of that energy, and
Mhm.
oh, it feels like accepting the assignment of telling the story.
Yep.
It this is like the second interview that I've gotten emotional with. I feel like I'm like having a moment right now because just in that vulnerability, just in taking the mantle to do something that somebody else hasn't done before, people don't
Mhm.
understand the level of glass breaking and the type of cuts and the vulnerability and just the digging deep that you have to do to choose that path. And I
Mhm.
just want to thank you. Like I can't wait to read it, right? I have my copy. And how did you how did you manage the rejection? How did you manage wanting to make people see that don't want to see? And then how did you manage being accepted by another wonderful Black woman to share this story with the world?
Right. Well, yeah, that process was tough. And sometimes, people ask me about that. I don't have an MFA, right? My both masters are in literature and education. So I do not have, I've never taken a class on how to write a novel, like the mechanics of it. I teach writing, but in many ways it's scholarly writing and research. It's not creative writing at all. And so I've never had that. But I teach literature, right? So there's certain conventions that I understand. But I went in, and you were asking me about process before. I went in writing this story because the characters showed up for me. And that's why I was saying like ancestral. I don't, and I have to say this, none of the characters in my book are people that I know or have modeled after, or even people I believe who are in my particular ancestral line, like people who've shown up. These are individual people who lived in Costa Rica or whose spirits were here or who wanted their stories told. And they just showed up for me. And particularly the first male character, Dakarai, he showed up from beginning to end. And I was just basically a muse. So it's not, when some people are like, I get up and I have my coffee and I go for my walk and then I write for 2 hours and every day I write. I am not the example of that. I was like 3 sentences here, 4 sentences here, 20 pages here, because I have a life. I was raising kids and, like, running a house and
Yeah.
teaching and doing all the other things and running a writing retreat and, all those things. Um, and so the rejections actually were devastating because it was the deepest space of vulnerability. This is the first time I'm writing creatively and I'm sending out these query letters. And so people are actually like, oh, we're interested. And they're like, let me read this. Let me read the first couple of chapters. And then they're like, okay, we'll get back to you in 3 to 6 months. Or, yes, sign something that we're just going to be working with you exclusively and then make all these revisions. And then 6 months at the end, oh, we decided we're dropping you.
Wow.
So it was that sort of process. And actually, how the serendipity of it was that Lisa was the person. I was one night, and I'm an early sleeper, I have to say this. So one night, I was feeling particularly hurt because um, I knew that a literary agency they were playing games with me. And I knew that, and I had done all the revision. They had asked me to do all this reading. I'd done all this stuff, and there were some Black people involved. And so I wanted to be respectful of that process and thinking that they were going to support me, even though the person I was engaged with was like the singular white person in the entire institute, in the organization. That for me was also a red flag because this person had not read any of the people that my book was in conversation with, right? Was telling me to read Bridgerton, and I was talking about Edric Dandy Katz, The Farming of Bones. Disconnect. Anyway, right. And so one night I was on Facebook and I was in a private group of, like, writers of color who are looking for literary agents, right? And so I was just like, I need some advice. Here's my situation. I didn't name any names. And I was just like, I would love some feedback on how to handle this because this rejection feels particularly, I mean, I see the game they're playing and I know there's going to be a no, but I want to know how to adjust and kind of move on because I've been sort of in a standstill for about 6 months working with them. And I signed sort of an exclusivity where I couldn't send out, other query letters and engage with other people. And Lisa wrote me privately, and it must have been like 11 o'clock at night. Like, your story sounds so interesting. I'm really sorry this happened to you. I'd be really interested in reading your manuscript. And like, I woke up the next morning, I sent her the manuscript draft, and she was like, we're off, you know? So it was serendipity. But let me tell you this, I do yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. I actually got trained during COVID, and that's a whole other story.
Everything happens during COVID.
Right. I had my favorite quote is from The Alchemist, and I have it on my yoga mat, and I look at it every day. And it's basically the idea that if you want something with your heart truly, the entire universe will conspire for it to happen. And I love that idea. And I believe in that idea. But everything has a time and a season, right? And so I knew that I had to wait for the right fit. And the book was not going to happen because I had to honor the people. I made a promise.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And
I made a promise. I made a promise, and I had to be like, okay, well, they're going to usher in the right people for me. And they did. And they did. And I'm so grateful, you know?
why are you leaving me so dumbfounded and speechless? Like, this never happens. It never happens. I'm proud of you. I don't have to know you for years to share and to say and to give you that. Like,
Thank you.
just the process of being attuned, choosing to take up the mantle of this work that you've chosen, really making all of the transitions that you did and dealing with the disappointment that is aligned with being creative and other people not, being in alignment. The thing that you just shared is understanding, and I love Paul Coelho, like Alchemist is one of my favorite books. Everything comes to us in the time that it's supposed to. Mm-hmm. And for people that are so that lean into really being on top of things, in charge of things, planning things, organizing things, you have a vision of how you like things to work because they make sense to you. That's a very difficult space to be within, to exist in, and to not get stuck right through in the disappointment, in the misunderstanding, and not knowing when, and just to kind of continue through, with your process. So thank you for staying the course, and asking for help. The help is out there. The help is available to us if we, one, give ourselves permission to seek it. And I'm so glad that Lisa responded to your inquiry, because now look, the world gets to partake in this gift that you've given. You get to give voice and, life to ancestors, antepasados. I'm really grateful. It's just a lot that's like, coming up for me in this moment. And how do you think that your life has been impacted through this entire process, through choosing to leave, not even leave, choosing to move to Costa Rica, doing this work, really leaning into wellness, becoming a yoga practitioner, all the things that you've done really to tap into the best version of yourself? How do you think your life has been impacted?
I think two things. I think my relationship with time has radically changed. So the grind, right, which is almost definitive of living a life in New York City, and then I guess in other parts of the United States, but the grind, I was a master of the grind. And it's not that I don't grind here. I do, because, economies are different, needs are different. My children, my son's in college and out of the country. But my relationship with time, right? The fact that that I trust certain processes now, and that I have a deep sense of faith. And I very quickly, through, I think, meditation and yoga, know how to get back to being grounded, right? And so that has to do with time, meaning that I'm taking out time to do meditation. I'm making sure that on the weekend, before I do anything else, my yoga mat is right in front of my bed. and so I'm getting up and going right to the yoga mat, and even if it's just a 10-minute stretch, it's about that. And so I think that also ancestrally in coming back to Costa Rica, my life has been impacted because I'm doing the job that my people want to do. I'm the family historian. I'm the one that does all the research and shows up for different family members and does the sort of documentation for our family, and my family appreciates it, because I have access to libraries and I do this thing. I'm trained as a scholar, so I know how to do research. I know how to get into the archives, and I know how to look at certain records. And so I think that I've been able to sort of bring a broader picture to my family's background and to their heritage. And that has then allowed me to, I think, lean more even deeply into a spiritual faithfulness and conversations with my ancestors, in terms of how I build my altar, in terms of how I honor my altar, and like really thinking about these people who did so much in order for me to get here. And it's a privilege to be back and to be in Costa Rica. It is my great grandmother is the furthest back in terms of Black women that I can go beyond the slave experience, right? So like beyond her, I mean, she came to Costa Rica in 1908. So beyond her from Jamaica, her mother and certainly her grandmother would have been enslaved women.
Wow.
Right. And so I know the plantation area that they came from. I know they were owned by an Irish plantation owner, and I know that sort of that genetic pool was very tight in that one area of Jamaica, but that's the extent. And so I come from my great grandmother, whose name I know, whose passport I have, like I know her story. And one of the things I think that has informed my life and being in Costa Rica and learning about my great grandmother is that she always said this. She said, and she had 7 children. She said, make every decision you're making, like big life decisions, not like, am I going to have bread or milk, right?
Right.
But like big life decisions, like, am I going to move? Am I going to get education? Am I going to get married? Am I going to make an investment? Am I going to buy property? Make every decision with 6 generations ahead.
Mm.
So think about the impact of whatever the decision you're going to make. If you're going to make a property, it has to be something that you can that have a legacy for at least 6 generations. And I am 4 in terms of generation. My daughter is 5, and inside of my daughter is 6.
Oh, yes. Oh my
And
God.
so I am very, very
Doing it.
mindful, of what my great grandmother set up. And the people in my family don't play. They are from that idea. The people don't, my family, they don't believe in like going to banks and all that stuff. Whoever has, someone's gonna, you sit with somebody and it's like somebody doesn't have school fees. Well, this auntie's gonna cover that.
Wow.
It's not we're gonna take out loans. No, you want to build a house, then so and so can live here for a while, rent free. You're gonna save and you're gonna build that house. That is how it works here.
Oh my God. The community,
Yeah.
like the lineage, the connection, the support, the grounding, what else could I call it? The foresight
Mm-hmm.
it sounds as if it's literally the foundation, that 6 generations, that thinking ahead, that
Yes.
is allowing so many to thrive in. How does having, because we're having a conversation about mental health, but it's not mental health on the nose, but I'm about to get into that. Having this type of support in Costa Rica, how has that helped you to thrive just with all of the things that are happening in your life and the chances that you're taking, just with everything that's happening? How does this support system that you are entrenched in help you to withstand life?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have to say that I'm radically different than the people in my family, right? So they are very much Caribbean, conservative, very Baptist, Methodist, evangelical Christians. But everybody has their Bible on their phone, so they could write, and so they share. So that is not my particular path, but I think what I have learned and loved from my family. Um, is that they have accepted me for all my peculiarities. So I'm the vegetarian, I mean, all these other things. I'm the person who very much celebrates an African sensibility. I mean, I've lived in Africa, and so, you know, in all my expansiveness, they have embraced me, and they're not asking me to be anything that I'm not, or anyone in my family not to be who they are. So we can present ourselves as our true selves. So I think that that's how the support shows up. The other way is that, particularly with the elders in my family, like the older cousins, what they have done is really, I think they allow me to meet them where they are and love them where they are. I'm not expecting them to change. And so I understand, but engaging with them still is really beautiful because I'm always searching for those tidbits of our family history and all the stories that they'll give. And so I really enjoy engaging with them, but it also helps me think about, elders and my own parents who are in their 80s. Thank God they're in great health, but it still allows me, because I'm in the sandwich generation. So I had kids, but I also have elders, right? And so thinking about my space in between as even I forge a career for myself or go forward as a writer and do all these things, I think that my family and the support really helps me to slow down and meet people where they are and really, really appreciate their lives, right? Because during COVID, I've had so much loss. I mean, we lost so many people, and not necessarily from COVID, right? From the stresses of COVID, all of those other traumas that shows up when you are under crisis. That's how we lost so many people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. The living through this panorama, um, the race-based stress that was
Mm-hmm.
amplified, um, all of the traumas kind of rearing their head at one time is a lot. And if we
Mm-hmm.
don't, and historically, we don't have the resources or access to the types of supports that are going to help us to be able to withstand all of the stress on a daily basis and then everything else that's happening in the world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate, you sharing that. As I was listening to you earlier share some of the daily practices, what I would call, or what I've learned, through my work. It's called, oh, I just lost the word. Like it's like the applied relaxation, right? Waking up to do yoga, my mat's there. Um, Writing on a daily basis, right? Leaning into that process of catharsis, being in nature, surrounded by community, engaging in pursuits that bring you joy and fulfillment. All of these things are tenets of mental health and wellness that we historically do, but we don't, it's not necessarily, yes, I'm intentionally taking care of my mental health by doing XYZ, right? So what I am curious about is, when you think specifically about the benefit of taking care of your mental health and wellness, being in Costa Rica, what do you think that looks like for you with all the many hats that you wear?
That can get tough, right? I mean, for me, I know that so the one signature for me is that I have to sleep, right?
Yes.
And so for me, and my son always laughs with me because he's in Canada, so he's an hour ahead, and I'm like, "Good night, I hope you have a good night." I send him a text. He's like, "Mom, it's only 9 o'clock," and I'm like, "Exactly," and I'm in bed.
Bedtime.
Um, right, because I understand that as an educator, you're making 1,000 decisions all throughout the day, and there is an absolute toll, and this is beyond just the academics, like, okay, I'm deciding to teach this text, or this student is responding this way and we're going to make these connections, or I'm going to give this kind of feedback in writing. This is when the student comes in and somebody's pulling you, like, so and so's in the bathroom, like on the floor and vomiting, and all these kinds. So those, beyond those things, so in a day it can be a whole lifetime, right, when you're engaging with students. And so that for me, so I know that if I don't get enough sleep, because I get up by 6, right, every day, if I don't get enough sleep, then I am not, like, it's like I've had like I'm drunk, and
Yeah.
I don't drink, you know, but it feels like I've had a lot of alcohol in my system, and I'm just not functioning, like I'm off, and I need to be on my game, you know, because once I'm on, and then at nighttime, you know, I do yoga nidra, I try to do that, but I also understand that I do work. And then there are some days, like on the weekend, I will prioritize. I'll say, okay, well, on Sunday, I'm gonna do the X, Y, and Z. I always plan out. But on Saturday, I'm gonna take the day off. I'm not gonna look at my phone. I'm going to read a book. I'm gonna sit in the garden, or I'm just gonna cook some food, or I'm gonna just stay in bed. And that is okay because I have grown people in my house who are not gonna starve,
Right.
you know, and everybody can manage themselves. I do not have babies anymore. But I think that that continues to be something that I have to be mindful about because I actually do a lot, right? And I give a lot, right? And so I'm really careful, but I also have an incredible community of sisters who check in on me, who are on the daily. You know, I have a good group of people who are really loving and affirming, and it's mutual, and so that helps a lot. But it's something that's a challenge. It's not something that I can say you know, it's over. It's something that I know how to do. It's a formula. Absolutely not, because life is challenging, you know, and you can't anticipate. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. So you have no idea what tomorrow will hold. But how do you manage to manage it when the stress comes in, right? And I know for me, if I don't hold sacred sleep, that sleep time, then I am just not going to be. I'm not going to be on in the ways that other people may need me to be on, and I need to be on for myself.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. It's really having a deep understanding of one, what do you need to be the best version of yourself on a daily basis? And how do you tap into, again, that support system, that community keeps coming up. People do not understand how we are as just people in general, we are a collectivist, society. Like we need to be able to connect with others to thrive. But I would even imagine, well, no, I know as Black women, all the things that we are fighting against in the world,
Mm-hmm.
that importance of a safe community, that importance of an engaging community, that importance of a loving and honest community. Because it just made me think about what you were sharing with the retreat. And I can only imagine if there would like to be any type of energy reader during those types of sessions, I can just imagine that the energy would just be off the chart. And
Oh,
so,
yes.
excuse me, as a Black woman, I'm wondering where's your growth opportunity when it comes to growing into this next version of yourself? Where do you see yourself planting seeds and wanting to continue to improve?
Mhm. Um, so I think that that happens specifically with supporting the Afro Costa Rican community that's here. And so let me give you this example. On Tuesday, which 2 days ago, well, 3 days for you. On Tuesday, it was the 150th anniversary of the December 20th, 1872 arrival of the first boat of 126 Jamaican workers. 123 men and 3 women came from Jamaica to arrive in Costa Rica on the Caribbean coast of Puerto Limon to begin work for the United Fruit Company and build the railroad. And then ultimately they continue with the banana plantations. This is essentially the first iteration of a migration pattern from Jamaica and then other parts of the English speaking Caribbean that would essentially bring my great grandmother over in 1908, right? And so I went to the Caribbean coast on I went on Monday night, but on Tuesday, because there was a big ceremony and there was a massive presentation and a visual exhibition, because there is an archivist who is a historian in the community, who is interviewing people and taking their documentation to trace everybody back 150 years. And it's a massive archive. Nobody's ever undertaken this project before. And it's all the Afro communities, because basically everybody's connected. In Costa Rica, if you are a Black person, most people are of Afro-Caribbean origin coming from that migration. If you are African descent, but many people don't even know that because they're mixed and you live in sort of the Pacific, those people were descendant of the enslaved and the free during the colonial period. But 1872 was after slavery, and it was after, slavery in Jamaica, and obviously Costa Rica was already a nation, and so these were laborers who made a choice, and they were educated, they were very Jamaican, and they brought everything over with them to the Caribbean coast. And so that community, and it's all women that's doing this. So they're scholars, right? The head of the library, this historian who's an archivist who's doing all this work. And remind you, this is unfunded work. This is just for the love of the community. And they are getting massive groups of people together to go through photographs and to do this documentation. And so in terms of growth for me, I am very much welcome and encouraged to be part of this committee, this historical working group. And what I'm in the process of doing is actually my next novel is called Naomi, and it's a light retelling of my great grandmother's story in 1940s in that time period in that region here in Costa Rica. And so doing this historical work also helps me because I can then put into place, well, who were her peers at that time period? Right?
Oh,
I can envision the world. And so that, I think, in terms of growth, that will be my contribution.
amazing. Oh my goodness. So I'm wondering my niece's name is Naomi, first of all. So
Oh, okay.
all the good vibes. What is what type of support, if you could ask for it, kind of would help further the mission of the work that y'all are doing? Because of course it's Black women. Because of course, it's out of the love for community and being able to solidify history. What type of support do you all as a community need to kind of help fund that project? And are there any things in the works for that to happen?
No, I mean, what needs to happen is, I mean, the committee is organized and it exists. And what needs to happen is basically some funding, right? So these are people who have full-time jobs and extra side hustles, running families, doing all that thing, traveling between the countries. I mean, throughout the country, because it's like a 4 or 5 hour bus ride from the Central Valley down to the coast to engage with people. And so it's a lot of work. And if you're not living in that community because you work elsewhere, it's a lot of travel. So yes, I think it's about money, like a research grant or something that would enable the committee to say, okay, for the head, let's say archivist, a $10,000 grant, which would say, okay, well, maybe I don't have to teach because she's a professor, an adjunct. Maybe she could buy out some time, like a course or two, so that she could actually then devote it to this project because it's online. They've created a document. This was something that definitely will be part of a national or governmental policy, but it also aids with things like, I know that you saw the UN just created a permanent commission for the decade of Afro descendants, right? So Etsy Campbell, who is the former vice president of Costa Rica and the first Black woman vice president in Latin America, is now the president of this UN commission. So all of these kinds of things would be incredible in terms of creating a documented archive to show the legacy, to show 4 generations, to show 5 generations, because what it does, when you have those names, when you have the documented lives, it proves that people were here doing the work, building the country, building community, and they cannot be made invisible. And
Ooh,
that's the problem.
that it solidifies. It gives it honestly gives life to the unspoken stories, heritage. It's honestly, when I hear you say that, it is a declaration of I am here I've
Mhm.
always been here, and I'm woven into the fabric of what this community is. Uh,
Exactly.
that's a lot. I really hope I'm definitely gonna stay in touch because I want to know all the things that happen
Yes.
with this good work. And I am just so grateful for all of the things that you've imparted today. I have one or two more questions.
Sure.
I I love this question. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of my children.
Such a
I'm definitely my even if they weren't my children, I'd be like, oh, those children are dope.
yeah.
I am most proud of my children. My children are wonderful human beings, and I am so grateful for them because I can rely on them. They have their own big personalities, but they are children who come from a home where they have been loved and their voices have not been censored. That's really important. We are definitely the type of family that never did Santa or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy because we were like, look, if we're working all year to save a little extra to get you that American Girl doll or to get you that iPad, we are not going to let some imaginary white man get the credit
Thank you. Thank you.
for no, it is because you have asked for this thing, and yes, we are participating in capitalism and all that other stuff, so it can't be extraordinary, it can be singular, but we, and the joy of you being able to enjoy this thing is something that we work towards, but certainly nobody else gets the credit for it. And so we told our children very quickly when they were young enough to understand there is no Santa, but it's not your job to break anybody else's narrative about Santa. And so that was our only requirement, so you can't tell your friends until they learn by themselves in their own homes. But yeah, because we were like, the world's a tricky place. Home should be the place that you always can find the truth, or at least a version of an answer that feels comfortable for your spirit.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, he's not getting none of the credit. Not after working all these hours and these tears and making these sacrifices. We want you to see that one, we care about you enough to do these things for
Mhm.
you, right?
Exactly.
And that we celebrate one another. Oh my God, Natasha, this has really fed my soul.
Oh,
And
good.
please share with our community how we can follow your journey, how we can stay connected to the work that you're doing. Please let us know.
Well, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Natasha Gordon Chipembere, my whole name. My website is the same, www.natashagordonchipembere. It's a 10-pound name that I'm very proud of. And, I would love for folks to read my book. Like if I could say anything, like get my book, teach it in your class, get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to do a Zoom with your students to engage with these questions because we're looking at Latin America, we're looking at slavery, we're looking at the concept of freedom, we're looking at coming of age stories. I mean, there's so many things that I cover in this book. So finding La Negrita. So I think that if folks want to, follow all the stuff that I do in terms of promoting the book, podcasts, other talks, interviews, IG lives, all that stuff is on my Instagram.
Okay, I'm definitely going to follow you. As soon as this interview is concluded, I am going to add you to my list of connections and
Please.
definitely continue to share because I've shared snippets already with the world, the work that you're doing. And I cannot wait for this interview to air because you have dropped so many gems on the airwaves today. And I am so grateful. And so thank you for taking time, right, to share your story, trusting me enough to share your story. And for everyone that is watching, once again, I want to say thank you for tuning into the Black Expat Experience. I encourage you to keep taking risks, impacting your communities, and lastly, and definitely not least, prioritizing your mental health. Our health is our wealth. And when we connect with others to spread our stories, our community grows. And I want to say thank you, and please tune in next time. And Natasha,
Thank
thank,
you.
thank you.